Have you ever wondered what really happens the moment an ordinary human is dragged into something they cannot name, cannot describe, and cannot ever return from? It's a question most people avoid, because the mind instinctively recoils from the idea that the world is not sealed, not contained, not safe. We like to believe that reality is a closed box with clear edges, air we can breathe, ground we can trust, and a horizon that simply marks the end of what we can see. But what if that horizon is not a boundary, only a thin membrane? What if, beneath everything familiar, there is a silent hunger waiting for the exact second a human mind slips, falters, or pauses just long enough to be noticed? Most people never consider that possibility. Most people never feel the invisible pressure that gathers behind them as they walk alone at night, the soft drop in air temperature just before they turn their head, or the faint tremor in their chest that doesn't come from fear but from something observing them, something patient. Ordinary life keeps the mind occupied, distracted, blind. But once in a while, a perfectly normal, unsuspecting human being steps into just the wrong piece of empty space, and disappears without a trace. For decades, these vanishings have been explained away as accidents, abductions, tragedies, or simple mysteries. But some patterns refuse to stay buried. Late-night investigators whisper about them. Obscure academics map them. Families haunted by missing loved ones sometimes speak of hearing a final word, a distant call, or a strange echo that makes no physical sense. Some claim they saw their family member pause for a moment, as if hearing something no one else could, and then walk forward into nothingness, as though dissolved into thin air. Every witness describes the same thing. Not a struggle, not a violent attack, but a pull. A silent, irresistible pull. Authorities never record these details. Reports are sanitized, simplified, flattened into a story the world is comfortable hearing. But beneath the official explanations lies a reality almost no one knows: humans are being taken. Not by creatures of folklore or by strangers lurking in shadows, but by a phenomenon older, deeper, and more elusive than any living thing. A force known only by those who survived its edge long enough to speak a single word before losing their voices forever. The blank. It is not a dimension, not a place, not an object or a creature. It is the absence of all those things. A gap, a void where rules collapse, where form vanishes, and where the human mind, desperate for meaning, begins to invent shapes out of terror. The blank cannot be seen because it is not there. It cannot be touched because there is nothing to touch. Yet it pulls with a strength no muscle can resist, no scream can escape, and no memory can endure intact. The first recorded disappearance linked to the blank did not come from a ghost town, an abandoned road, or a dark forest. It happened in a crowded place, in broad daylight, under perfect weather. Witnesses swear that everything seemed normal, until the moment wasn't normal anymore. A man simply stopped walking, tilted his head slightly as if listening to something behind him, and then stepped sideways, into a space that should have been empty. And he was gone. Not a drop of blood. Not a footprint. Not even the displacement of air. As though the world itself inhaled him. To most, this sounded like exaggeration or hysteria. But to those who studied the pattern, it marked the beginning of an understanding. The blank does not appear where we expect. It appears where the human mind is least prepared. On quiet porches. In sunlit kitchens. On familiar streets walked 1,000 times before. It waits for moments of emotional weakness, mental noise, or a single fleeting lapse of attention. Because the blank does not force its way into our world, we open the door ourselves. Its victims share one common trait: ordinary lives. Not explorers, not thrill seekers, not mystics. Just humans who believed reality was stable. Humans who trusted the ground under their feet. Humans who never imagined they could be swallowed by silence. And that is precisely what makes them vulnerable. What we know is this: the blank is patient. It observes, it selects, and when it finally reaches for someone, there is no warning except a sudden awareness, a chilling, instinctive realization that something familiar has become wrong. The sound of a whisper that wasn't spoken, a shadow that doesn't belong to anything, a feeling that the air behind you has thickened, as if trying to form invisible fingers. At first, the mind tries to rationalize it, to soothe the rising panic, to explain the sensation away. But the blank is not discouraged by logic. It is fed by attention. The moment a human acknowledges the feeling, even silently, even with the smallest flicker of fear, it tightens its grip. So what really happens to those taken? Why them? Why then? And what becomes of them on the other side of nothing? These are questions we are not supposed to ask. Knowledge invites attention. Attention invites the blank. Those who come too close to understanding often feel it stir behind them, as though curious to know what they know. But once a mind begins to uncover its rules, it becomes visible to the very thing it is trying to study. Still, the truth must be told, because someone needs to understand what is happening behind the curtain of ordinary life. Someone must follow the thread left behind by those who vanished. Someone must go deep enough into the darkness to map what others fear to acknowledge. What happens when ordinary humans are dragged into the blank isn't random. It isn't senseless. It isn't accidental. It is deliberate. And one case more than any other reveals the first true glimpse into this hidden phenomenon, the disappearance of a man named Elias Rowan. Not a criminal, not a scientist, not a man seeking danger. Just a simple, familiar figure, a middle-aged man walking home after a long day, unaware that the world beneath his feet was thinning. Unaware that something ancient was watching him pause for half a second longer than usual. Unaware that such a small moment was all the blank needed. Elias's story is not famous. It never reached the news. It was buried, quieted, smoothed over like dust on a forgotten shelf. But his final minutes before being taken, and the truth of what he experienced after, remain one of the closest things we have to a first-hand account of the blank. And once you hear what happened to him, you may never walk through an empty room the same way again. Elias Rowan was not the kind of man anyone expected to become the center of an impossible phenomenon. He lived a quietly forgettable life, defined not by remarkable choices but by the comfort of routine. He walked the same route to work every morning, ate at the same corner shop every afternoon, and returned home each evening along the same narrow street lined with flickering street lamps that never seemed to work correctly. He was an ordinary human with ordinary fears, ordinary hopes, and an ordinary belief that tomorrow would look exactly like today. That belief became the foundation of the tragedy that followed, because the blank hunts best in the spaces people consider safe. In the weeks leading up to his disappearance, Elias had begun to notice something he couldn't articulate. His world felt thinner. Some days, while leaving his apartment, he paused because the hallway felt too quiet. Not the normal quiet of early morning, but a quiet that pressed against him, like cotton stuffed into his ears. Other times, he caught himself turning his head toward an empty corner, convinced someone had just spoken his name. It wasn't a whisper, not exactly. More like the aftertaste of a sound, a sensation that lingered without ever fully existing. Elias blamed stress, exhaustion, lack of sleep. He never once imagined that something was observing him through the fabric of space he took for granted. There were also moments when he felt a strange heaviness in the air around him, as if the world had briefly exhaled and forgotten to inhale again. Birds would go silent, footsteps would echo oddly, his own breathing would sound muffled. These were early signs of proximity to the blank, but Elias had no way of recognizing them. To him, they were just discomforts, background noise of a life spent moving through monotony. But while Elias ignored the warnings, others had not been so lucky. Unknown to him, similar vanishings had unfolded across the world for decades, each one tucked carefully out of public memory. The patterns were scattered geographically but eerily consistent in nature. People always vanished in places they felt comfortable. A child walking home from school. A woman stepping into her backyard at dawn. An elderly man sitting in his favorite armchair. Not one showed signs of struggle. Not one left behind physical evidence. Not one produced a single rational explanation. The rare witnesses who tried to describe what they saw were dismissed as confused or traumatized. Their accounts were marked by fragmented language and shaking voices. Many spoke of the same surreal sensation, a shadow without form, a distortion in the air, a moment when space seemed to fold inward like a curtain being tugged from the opposite side. Some said they felt a tug in their own bodies, as if something had briefly tried to pull them as well before releasing its grip. But the most disturbing testimonies were the simplest ones. They stepped into nothing, they were there, and then they weren't. There wasn't even a sound. Official reports would never include such statements. The world prefers explanations, even bad ones, to the idea of a silent predator woven into the fabric of reality. The truth is always sanitized, confirming what people want to believe, that the world is predictable, rational, bound by physical laws. But the blank is the violation of all of those things, and Elias Rowan was about to discover that firsthand. A week before Elias vanished, something unusual happened near the edge of his town. A local hiker reported hearing strange echoes while walking through a lightly wooded area. The echoes didn't match his footsteps, they were softer, delayed, almost reversed, as if the sound had changed its mind halfway through traveling. When investigators searched the area later, they found nothing except an odd drop in temperature confined to a perfect circular patch of ground. No animals entered the area. Birds avoided flying overhead, compasses spun chaotically in place. This was one of countless quiet warnings the world received, and ignored. That same week, someone else felt the blank's presence more directly. A woman from a nearby neighborhood awoke abruptly one night with the certainty that someone was standing beside her bed. Her heart pounded, and she held her breath, listening. The room felt too cold, too still, too crowded despite being empty. She later told authorities she saw something in the corner of her eye, a faint ripple, like heat distortion, but reversed, colder instead of warmer. When she blinked, it was gone. She brushed it off as a nightmare. 2 nights later, she vanished. Her bed was left perfectly undisturbed. The sheets, smooth, the window locked, the door untouched. Her disappearance was never connected to Elias's. Not publicly, at least. But there were people, hidden communities of researchers, obsessives, and survivors, who noticed that both individuals had reported the same chilling sensation days before vanishing, the feeling of being watched by something that wasn't there. This sensation wasn't new. Survivors, real survivors, the few who somehow pulled back before being fully consumed, described it as the moment the blank picked its next one. Some sensed a shift in their environment, like the universe had blinked while they were inside it. Some felt their thoughts being grazed, not read, but brushed against, like fingers tracing the edges of a page. Others reported hearing the same whisper Elias would claim to hear shortly before he was taken, their own name, spoken in a voice they recognized but couldn't place. But the most terrifying sign was the loss of memory, small at first, then growing. Minutes would slip away, conversations would fade seconds after they happened. Survivors described their minds feeling porous, as though something were gently tugging thoughts out like loose threads, examining them, trying to find the right one to latch onto. Humans aren't meant to notice the blank, and when they do, it becomes aware of them in return. Elias Rowan's first clear encounter with the phenomenon happened 4 days before he disappeared. He was walking home as the sun dipped below the rooftops, casting the street in a soft, fading orange. The moment felt familiar, almost comforting, until he realized he couldn't remember the last few blocks he had walked. It was as though his brain had skipped a scene, cutting abruptly from one moment to the next without warning. He stopped, confused, turning around to trace his path. Nothing looked wrong, nothing seemed out of place. But something inside him whispered that he had lost time, that he had stepped through a gap he couldn't see. Then he heard it, soft, distant, unmistakable. Someone whispered his name, not urgently, not angrily, more like an invitation, a calm beckoning from a place just out of sight. Elias spun around, but there was no one, only the quiet street and the faint rustle of leaves. The whisper felt too close, too intimate, as though spoken directly against the back of his mind rather than into his ear. It lingered, echoing faintly inside him. He walked faster the rest of the way home, telling himself it was nothing. But deep down, something in him trembled. That whisper didn't feel like imagination. It felt like recognition. In the days that followed, Elias's world began unraveling subtly but unmistakably. Patterns changed, familiar sounds warped, his reflection occasionally lagged by a fraction of a second. Nothing dramatic, just enough to unsettle him, to make him question whether he was tired or losing his grip. But the blank wasn't causing hallucinations. It was drawing closer, thinning the barrier between its void and Elias's existence. On the final day, Elias woke with an unshakable heaviness in his chest. His apartment felt colder than usual. Shadows clung to corners they normally avoided. His breath came out in faint clouds despite the warm temperature. He could hear something faint, not a sound, but a pressure. A subtle inward pull, like the air was waiting for him to move. He stepped outside, hoping fresh air would clear his mind. But the world outside felt wrong too. The colors were slightly desaturated, the ambient noise dimmer. Even the sunlight seemed to fade at the edges, losing its warmth before reaching his skin. The blank had chosen him, and the world was already beginning to retreat. Before the end of that day, Elias would discover exactly what it meant to be selected, and he would learn that when ordinary humans are dragged into the blank, they don't disappear. They are claimed. Elias Rowan did not feel the exact moment the world let him go. It wasn't a violent transition, nor was it marked by any dramatic sound or sudden flash. Instead, it happened the way sleep claims a tired mind, quietly, gradually, without permission or warning. One heartbeat belonged to the world he knew. The next heartbeat belonged to something that was not a world at all. He had been walking, his steps slow and uneven, his thoughts unsteady as he tried to shake off the sensation of being followed by something invisible. The whisper of his name still clung to the edges of his memory like a fading bruise. He turned a corner he had turned 1,000 times before, and then, there was nothing. Not darkness, not silence, nothing. Elias did not fall. His body didn't stumble or jolt. He simply existed in one place, and then existed somewhere else without transition. It was only when his mind tried to interpret the absence around him that panic began to form, slow and thick, rising like cold smoke. The first thing he noticed was the absence of ground beneath his feet. Yet he wasn't falling. His body floated in a weightless stillness, suspended in a place that did not have direction. Up, down, forward, backward, none of these concepts applied. His limbs felt their weight, yet nothing held them. His lungs expanded with breath, yet the air had no temperature, no texture, no scent. It wasn't even air. It was simply nothing that his body interpreted as something. Elias opened his mouth to speak, to scream, to demand answers, but the sound didn't behave the way sound should. His voice didn't echo, it fractured. The noise stretched into delicate strands of light that shimmered briefly, then dissolved into the emptiness. His scream was being converted into something else, something alien to the laws of nature he had always trusted. His chest tightened. Panic clawed at him. He tried to kick, to flail, to anchor himself against anything, but there was no resistance. His movements felt like gestures in a dream, frantic, futile, swallowed whole. The blank did not push back. It simply existed, vast and indifferent, letting him exhaust himself. Moments passed, or hours. Time did not function properly here. Elias felt his thoughts slipping, blurring at the edges. Memories flickered like dying candle flames. His mother's face surfaced for a heartbeat, then dissolved. A moment from childhood rose sharply, then faded as if someone had wiped it away. The more he tried to cling to something, the faster it unraveled. Then he saw something, a faint ripple far above him, or below him. It was impossible to define. The ripple spread like a shimmer on the surface of invisible water. Shapes formed, faces blurred, bodies half existed, floating like ghostly silhouettes that appeared and vanished before he could fully register them. He wasn't alone. He tried to call out, even knowing what would happen to his voice, but desperation outweighed reason. Again, his sound fractured into threads of light that drifted away. The silhouettes around him stirred, slow, cautious movements, as if reacting to the disturbance. One of them drifted closer. It didn't walk or float. It simply transitioned from one point to another, skipping space itself. Up close, Elias saw that it was, almost, human. The outline resembled a person, but the details were blurred, the features smeared as though half erased. Its body flickered inconsistently, as if it were being redrawn every moment by someone unsure of what a human looked like. Elias tried to back away, but there was nowhere to go. The figure tilted its head toward him. Its face, if it could be called a face, formed only for an instant. Eyes, mouth, and nose emerging like ink in water before dissolving again. When it spoke, it didn't use sound. Its words appeared inside Elias's mind like intrusive thoughts. Don't remember too strongly. The warning hit him with the force of a blow. His mind recoiled instinctively. What does that mean? He tried to think, but the answer wasn't given. Instead, more silhouettes emerged from the nothing, drawn by the disturbance of his arrival. Some appeared more solid, others less. A few looked almost fully human, until they moved, and their forms distorted unnaturally, as if stretched by invisible hands. Faces collapsed and reformed, limbs bent at angles that didn't follow any logical anatomy. Elias felt a deep, nauseating dread. These were not hallucinations. They were people, fragments of people. Souls caught between collapse and coherence. Humans who had been trapped long enough for the blank to begin rewriting them. One figure drifted close enough that Elias could see its fragmented memories flicker across its shape like broken film. A wedding ring flashing on a blurred hand. A child's laughter echoing faintly. The memory of sunlight. The hint of someone's name. All of it distorted, slipping away like sand through open fingers. These were the others. The taken. But not all of them were dead. A second figure spoke into his mind, its voice brittle and fading. Your fear shapes this place. Control it. Elias tried to steady himself, though it felt impossible. His emotions were too chaotic, too raw. He didn't understand the rules. He didn't even understand what the place was. But the more he panicked, the more the blank reacted. The emptiness around him began to thicken. Colors emerged, faint, pulsing blues and deep, smothering blacks twisting like ink underwater. The void shifted, as though stirred by invisible currents responding to his terror. His surroundings suddenly warped. A shape appeared where nothing had been, a large, jagged structure forming from the amorphous dark. It resembled a building, or perhaps a ruin, shaped by Elias's subconscious attempt to understand the space. The blank was not creating it, his mind was. The void had no rules, so the human mind filled the vacuum with meaning to stay sane. But meaning came with consequences. The structure didn't remain static. It bent, cracked, reshaped itself continuously, melting and reforming like wax caught in a flame. The others drifted away from it carefully. They seemed to sense something Elias didn't. He had created a landmark in the blank, and landmarks attract attention. A sharp pressure pulsed through the void. A deep vibration, something stirred far beyond sight, a presence, a consciousness, ancient and vast. The others reacted instantly, their forms trembling. One fragment whispered into Elias's mind, desperately urgent this time. Don't think, don't feel. It wakes them. Elias's heartbeat spiked. Something in the dark was responding to the structure he had inadvertently summoned. And as his fear increased, the presence grew sharper, clearer, more aware. He felt its gaze long before he saw its shape. It wasn't a visual sensation. It was a mental weight, a pressure like a massive hand pressing against his thoughts. It pushed memories to the surface, memories he didn't want to revisit. Regret, shame, pain. These emotions rose uncontrollably, pulled upward like threads being tugged by an unseen puppeteer. The blank was feeding. The others scattered, fading into the fractured nothing as the presence drew near. Elias felt himself unraveling, his mind straining under the pressure. His memories were being peeled back, examined, tasted. One memory rose unbidden, the last conversation he had with his father before he died. A conversation filled with guilt, misunderstanding, and words Elias wished he could take back. The regret was so strong, so vivid, that the blank reacted violently. The presence began to form. Slowly, silently, a shape coalesced in the distance, a tall, monstrous silhouette molded from Elias's own grief. It grew larger by the second, fed by his spiraling fear. It moved not through space, but through emotion, drawn to the raw wound inside him. It was not the blank itself. It was what the blank created. A creature shaped by memory, sharpened by regret, made real by terror. The others had warned him. In the blank, your memories are not internal. They manifest, and once manifested, they hunt. The creature's head turned toward Elias. Its form sharpened, its presence deepened. The void trembled. Elias felt himself shrinking under its growing weight. The blank had found the memory it wanted, and it was coming for him. The creature stepped forward without walking, without even moving. It simply became closer, as though distance surrendered to its presence. One moment it was a distant silhouette forming from Elias's grief, and the next moment it towered mere meters away, bending the emptiness around it. Its body wasn't solid flesh, nor was it entirely shadow. It shifted between both, blurring, stretching, contracting, never holding a shape long enough to be comprehended. Every new form it assumed seemed to grow more monstrous, built from fragments of human anatomy and broken memories, like a reflection shattered and reassembled incorrectly. Elias could feel the creature before he could fully see it. A crushing pressure filled his chest, as though invisible hands were squeezing his lungs from the inside. His heartbeat stuttered, his thoughts splintered, panic built inside him like rising steam, burning, expanding, looking for an escape. The creature grew stronger with every pulse of fear that leaked from him. He knew immediately. This thing did not exist independently. It was a parasite of memory, his memory. A manifestation sculpted by a moment of regret he had never fully confronted. It leaned forward, and its face flickered. For one horrifying instant, Elias saw his father's features reflected in it, eyes hollow, mouth twisted in the shape of a word Elias had heard only once before his father died, why? But the expression twisted grotesquely, stretching into something far beyond human sorrow. Then the face dissolved again, replaced by shifting darkness. Elias felt a scream tearing through his throat, but even his terror was devoured by the blank. His voice disintegrated into thin white strands of light, which the creature absorbed greedily, as though it fed not only on emotion but on expression itself. The air, if it could be called air, thickened. The void vibrated softly, a distant humming like the resonating hum of strings on an enormous instrument. It was the sound of the blank responding to the entity's awakening. Elias felt the vibration in his bones, in the back of his skull, in the marrow of his fear. The blank was not indifferent anymore. It was alert, curious. The creature raised something like an arm, a long, distorted limb that flickered between muscle and smoke. It didn't touch Elias. It didn't have to. The limb pointed toward him like an accusation, and immediately Elias felt his memories ignite, one after another, like sparks crackling into existence. A memory rose sharply in his mind, his childhood bedroom lit only by the faint glow of a streetlight. The night he lied to avoid facing something painful. The night he promised himself he would grow braver, kinder, better. The night he promised to fix things, but never did. The memory was soft, ordinary, and small, yet it flared with guilt when the creature touched it. The entity flourished in it. Elias felt the memory stretch outward, ripped from the confines of his mind. The blank projected it around him, turning the memory into a living environment that pulsed and warped. His childhood room appeared, but not accurately. The angles were wrong, too sharp. The bed too long. The desk too far away. The shadows too thick, clinging to the corners like living things. The window floated slightly above where it should be, trembling as though held by invisible threads. He was inside a memory, but the blank had twisted it into something hostile. Elias staggered backward. His feet didn't hit ground, but the room shifted around him in response to the motion, compensating for physics that didn't exist here. His breath caught when the shadows in the corner of the room began to expand, thickening like ink poured into water. From inside the darkness, faint whispers echoed, children's voices, fragments of sentences, broken syllables. Words he remembered hearing as a child but had long forgotten. They grew louder, climbing over each other. Accusations, questions, fears, all of them from him. All of them used against him. The entity fed on these echoes. With each whispered memory, its form sharpened, stabilizing into something far more horrifying. Elias's regret had given it shape. His fear was giving it strength. He tried to shut down the memory, to force his mind away from the pain inside it, but the blank did not allow him to choose. He was a guest in his own mind, and the void reshaped his thoughts into a prison. One of the distorted childlike figures emerged from the shadows. Its face was blurred, its limbs too long, its movements disjointed. It opened its mouth, too wide, stretching vertically instead of horizontally, and spoke in Elias's childhood voice. "You didn't keep your promise." Elias stumbled. No, this isn't real. This isn't." The creature behind the figure, the entity made of grief and memory, reacted. It leaned closer, its shifting mass producing a sound Elias felt directly in his bones, a vibrating wave that scraped across the inside of his skull. A punishment for speaking, for resisting, for remembering too violently. Elias felt his sanity waver. But then, something else stirred in the distorted room. A flicker, a pale light, a presence he hadn't noticed before. One of the other lost silhouettes, the human fragments trapped in the blank, had appeared at the edge of his warped memory. It didn't speak aloud, but its thoughts pressed gently into Elias's mind. "Stop remembering what hurts. Remember what holds." Elias didn't understand. "What does that mean?" he thought, his voice shaking even in his mind. The fragment responded with a sensation rather than words, a soft warmth, a gentle echo of a memory that belonged to Elias, but not a painful one. A small moment of peace. A memory of sitting on a hill as a teenager, watching the sunset in silence, feeling calm for no particular reason. This memory began to rise, weaving itself into the atmosphere of the blank. The dark, warped childhood room flickered. The shadows recoiled, shrinking away from the intruding warmth. The entity paused, as though confused. It leaned backward, its form destabilizing. The fragment pressed harder, urging Elias mentally. "Control the memory, shift it, shape it. The blank will take from you, unless you give it something different." Elias gritted his teeth, struggling to focus. It felt like wrestling against his own mind while drowning in it. The entity pressed back, forcing more painful memories through him, arguments, disappointments, moments he regretted but never voiced. The blank pulsed around them, feeding on the emotional conflict. Elias clung desperately to the peaceful memory. He pictured the hill, the grass, the sky, the warmth of the setting sun. He repeated the image in his mind, shaping it, pulling it closer like a shield. Slowly, painfully, the warped childhood room began to crack. Soft golden light seeped through the fractures. The entity roared silently, its form splintering as the peaceful memory grew stronger, pushing back against the suffocating void. Elias concentrated harder. The memory became clearer. He remembered the color of the sky that evening, soft orange fading into violet. He remembered the smell of the breeze. He remembered a moment of clarity he had never fully appreciated until now. The blank reacted. The golden light expanded, pushing the darkness outward. The entity recoiled further, its limbs fracturing, dissolving into vapor. For the first time since entering the blank, Elias felt something like control. The other human fragment whispered one final message into his mind. If you shape the blank, you survive. If it shapes you, you vanish. The entity dissolved into a spiraling cloud of broken memory shards, screaming without sound before disappearing entirely. Elias collapsed, though there was no floor, gasping for breath. The golden light of the peaceful memory slowly dimmed, merging back into the void. The blank grew quiet again. Its hunger receded, though not entirely. It had tested him. He had survived. But this was only the first encounter. And the blank never stops at one. Elias didn't know how long he had been drifting inside the shapeless dark, or if drifting even meant anything in a place that had no direction, no up or down, no sense of beginning or end. But slowly, as if the darkness had grown tired of pretending to be empty, something began to change. The air thickened, though there was no air, and the darkness curled inward like a living lung inhaling. Elias sensed movement around him, but not in the way humans sense footsteps or presence. It was a pressure in the mind, a weight dragging across memories, flipping through thoughts like pages in a stolen book. He felt watched, not by eyes, but by awareness. Something ancient, something hungry, something that had been waiting for him to think too loudly. For the first time since arriving, Elias understood what the echo humans meant when they whispered that the darkness was not a void but a predator. The blank wasn't simply a space, it was alive, and it was listening. At first, he tried to stay calm, knowing that fear strengthened whatever lived here. But calm was impossible when he felt his oldest memories surfacing without permission. His childhood kitchen, the shape of his father's shadow on the wall, the smell of rain through a broken window, little fragments rose like bubbles in deep water, and every time a memory shimmered into focus, the darkness around him twitched, reacting to it. Elias pushed the memories back down, but something in the blackness tugged on them, savoring them like flavors. Terror seeped into his bones as the pressure grew stronger. The darkness was feeding on him, feeding on the story of who he had been. Then the darkness took form. It began as a ripple, a distortion of nothing, like a flaw in reality. Elias squinted, trying to make sense of it, but the shape was refusing clarity. It was fluid, shifting, as though trying on different outlines. The more he stared, the more its form solidified, shaped by his fear. Arms emerged, then melted away. A head appeared, then dissolved into mist. The entity wasn't choosing a shape, it was waiting for him to provide one. It needed his mind to sculpt it, needed his memories to give it a face. And as Elias desperately tried not to think of anything, one memory slipped through the cracks. One face, one voice, one regret, and the creature grew. It elongated, towering above him, its outline sharpening into something disturbingly familiar. The height, the build, the slumped shoulders of a man defeated by time. Elias felt his heartbeat crash in his chest as realization struck. The creature was forming around the memory of his father, not the father he loved, but the version etched with disappointment, with arguments left unresolved, with words Elias wished he could take back. The creature's head tilted with the same slow, weary motion he had seen 1,000 times. Its hollow skull flickered with a voice carved from the echo of his guilt. It didn't speak with sound, its voice emerged directly into Elias's mind like a bruise spreading under skin. You never listened. The words, his father's words, rattled through the blank. Elias stumbled backward, but there was no ground to catch him. The creature moved forward effortlessly, drawn to the emotion radiating from him. The fear sharpened it, the guilt gave it weight. Every regret sculpted another inch of its monstrous body. He tried to look away, but looking made no difference. The creature existed inside his mind, not outside of it, and it was only one of many. In the far reaches of the blank, more distortions stirred, attracted by the emotional storm he had accidentally unleashed. Elias realized the truth too late. The entities here did not hunt flesh or blood. They hunted identity, memory, humanity. Every victim dragged into the blank brought their entire life with them, every joy, every loss, every fear, and the creatures fed on those experiences like starving wolves tearing into meat. And Elias had given them a feast. The creature stepped closer, and the darkness behind it peeled open like a wound. From that wound, other shapes seeped out, unfinished, half-formed beings that flickered with stolen memories not their own. Elias sensed fragments of hundreds, maybe thousands of stolen identities swirling within them. These creatures were built from countless pieces of countless people, a collage of dread carved over generations. And now Elias's memories were being added to the tapestry. A cold certainty sank into him. There was no safety here, no hiding, no escape. Not while the creatures knew who he was. Not while his memories fed them. And the blank had only just begun to eat. The creature shaped from Elias's past did not rush toward him. It didn't need to. Its presence alone squeezed his thoughts into a trembling haze, forcing every buried memory back to the surface. The more he fought to keep himself from remembering, the more violently the blank tugged at the edges of his mind, prying open every door he had tried to keep shut. The figure, his father, yet not his father, leaned forward, and its movement dragged a thin, slicing tear across the space around it, as though reality itself recoiled from its existence. Elias could feel the creature feeding, not through touch, not through any physical connection, but through the simple act of recalling who it had been made from. A childhood argument he had tried to forget rose unbidden. A moment of regret he had carried for decades unfolded in front of him. The creature grew stronger with every detail he relived. Elias's breathing became shallow. He wanted to push the memories away, to force the creature to dissolve back into the amorphous void it came from, but the blank punished resistance. The harder he tried to silence his mind, the louder every regret became. He remembered the night he walked away from home without saying goodbye. The final phone call he ignored. The resolve in his father's face when he tried to warn Elias not to abandon the life he was building. All of it surged through him now, and the creature fed on every pulse of doubt, every fracture of shame. The blank amplified the emotions until they were unbearable, sculpting the creature into a monstrous embodiment of everything Elias had never confronted. The creature's steps, if they were steps, rippled the darkness like stones thrown into black water. Each ripple carried memories that weren't voluntary. Elias felt himself pulled into spirals of the past, as though the blank wanted him to drown in the things he had spent years pretending didn't matter. He watched himself as a teenager slamming the door. He watched himself as a grown man refusing to call home. He watched the moment he realized he had run out of chances to make things right. The creature's head tilted, and its eyes, hollow, shifting voids, reflected those moments back at him. They weren't eyes. They were mirrors. Is this what you wanted? The creature's voice asked, though the words didn't come from a mouth. They crawled across Elias's thoughts like worms burrowing through soft soil. The voice was wrong, too clear, too sharp, a distortion of what memory claimed his father sounded like. But it didn't need to be accurate. It only needed to hurt. The blank knew that pain held power, and the creature was a weapon forged entirely out of his deepest wounds. Elias tried to force himself to think of something else, anything else, but every attempt collapsed. The blank simply responded by dragging another fragment of his life into focus. His failures at work, the friendships he let die, the promises he made and broke, every misstep, every flaw, every moment he had hoped time would erase was now a tool the blank used to torment him. And for the first time since he arrived in this place, Elias felt his sense of self weakening. It was as if the blank was hollowing him out, carving pieces of him away and reshaping them into something monstrous. The creature reached out a long, distorted arm that flickered between solid and smoke. Elias recoiled instinctively, though he had nowhere to move. The space around him hardened into cold pressure, like invisible walls pushing him closer to the monstrosity. Panic surged through him, deep and suffocating, and the creature grew sharper, taller, more defined. The blank fed on fear as much as memory, and Elias's fear was pouring out of him uncontrollably. Yet somewhere inside that panic, a realization formed: the creature wasn't attacking him. It didn't need to. Its presence itself was enough to break him down piece by piece. The blank didn't want to physically destroy its victims. It wanted to consume their identity, to unravel their minds until nothing remained but fragments. Elias now understood why the Echo humans warned him to be careful with memory. A strong memory awakened the beasts. A painful memory empowered them. And a memory filled with guilt created something nearly unstoppable. The creature loomed over him, its form solidifying with every shiver of fear that escaped his body. Elias felt his vision blur as the blank tightened around him like a shrinking room. He forced himself to breathe, though breathing was an illusion here. He forced his eyes away from the creature, though looking away didn't help. He fought to hold on to the thought that he was still himself, that he was still alive, that he mattered beyond the regrets the blank was twisting into monsters. But every time he clung to identity, the blank struck at it, peeling away layers of who he was like delicate pages torn from a book. When the creature finally reached him, it didn't touch him in the physical sense. It placed its impossible hand against the side of his head, not on his skin but on his mind. Elias felt it press into his memories like a knife sliding into soft flesh. He felt his childhood collapsing into static. He felt his father's face blurring. He felt himself slipping, and he realized with terrifying clarity, his past wasn't just haunting him, it was swallowing him whole. Before the creature could fully dig itself into Elias's mind, another presence cut through the blank like a shockwave. It was not gentle, not warm, not even remotely comforting, yet it was distinctly different from the predatory force trying to consume him. A sudden burst of pressure snapped through the darkness, sharp and disorienting, and the creature built from Elias's past recoiled, its flickering form spasming with distortion. Elias stumbled backward, or whatever counted as backward here, his thoughts momentarily released from the crushing grip of the monster. For the first time, he sensed that there were other forces within this abyss, things that were not entirely made from his memories, but from the shattered remains of others who came before him. The darkness shifted, thinning in places, curving in others, as if the blank itself reluctantly made room for newcomers. Shapes materialized ahead, not solid, not whole, yet undeniably human, or what remained of humans who had survived long enough to be hollowed out by this devouring dimension. Elias felt a pulse of recognition, not from memory, but from instinct. These beings were survivors, but only in the loosest sense of the word. They drifted toward him as if pulled by a slow, gravitational sorrow, their forms flickering with patches of missing detail. Faces half-formed, limbs partially transparent, torsos filled with holes where memories should have been. They looked like beings carved from broken reflections, as though someone had taken the idea of a human and stitched it together with threads of forgetting. One stepped closest, or perhaps floated, Elias could not tell. Its jaw moved without sound at first, as if it had forgotten how to speak. Then a stuttering voice, thin, trembling, and layered with the echoes of many others, leaked out. "You pulled too much," it whispered, head twitching as if listening to thoughts that were not its own. "The blank heard you. It shaped you. It marked you." The creature behind Elias snarled silently, not with sound but with a tremor of pure malice that rippled through the void. The fractured survivors flinched, their shapes warping like disturbed water. Elias realized with a cold dread that these beings lived in constant fear of the predators born from memories, including their own. Every twitch, every sudden thought, every emotional spark could summon a nightmare powerful enough to tear them apart all over again. Another survivor drifted closer. Its eyes were hollow craters filled with static. Its voice carried the weight of centuries. "It feeds on what you are," it rasped. "On your joys, your regrets, your fears. It devours the stories you brought with you. When the memories run out," its head twitched violently before it finished, "it eats what's left." Elias forced himself to speak, though his voice trembled. "What are you? What happened to you?" They shuddered, as if the question itself carried pain. "We were taken," the first one answered. "Like you, like everyone who vanishes. Some of us tried to hold on to our memories. Some tried to forget everything. Both paths destroy you differently." A third survivor, smaller, thinner, barely more than a wavering outline, spoke as if reciting a warning etched into the deepest part of their being. "The blank is not a place. It is a hunger. It pulls in what it can find. It uses what you bring. And it never stops eating." Elias felt the weight of those words deepen inside him. The survivor was not exaggerating. The blank had already begun unraveling him, thread by thread, each memory it touched leaving a hollow ache behind. But seeing these broken beings, these living remains, showed him what the final stages of that unraveling looked like. They were not alive, but not dead, not whole, but not entirely gone. They floated in an eternal limbo, unable to escape the predators shaped from themselves, unable to fully dissolve. The blank had devoured their identities until all that remained were flickering shells. The closest survivor drifted toward Elias and reached out, not with a hand, but with a shifting smear of form. When it touched him, a shock flooded through him, a torrent of stolen memories. He saw flashes of people he did not know. Children crying, a man screaming into a collapsing void, a woman clawing at a memory that no longer belonged to her. Moments of terror, fragments of joy, all swirling together, disconnected from the people who once lived them. These survivors were patchworks made from whatever scraps the blank had failed to digest. The survivor's voice cracked as it withdrew. We tried to escape its hunger. But nothing escapes. The blank cannot be beaten. Only bargained with. Bargained, Elias whispered. How? Their broken forms trembled, as though the truth itself was dangerous to say. You give it something it wants more than you, the hollow-eyed survivor whispered. A memory powerful enough to distract it. A sacrifice. Its voice grew quieter. But the memory must be real. Something that defines you. Something it will gorge itself on. Elias felt his stomach twist in dread. He knew what memory it meant. He knew which wound the blank had sensed deepest, which regret it had turned into a creature ready to devour him whole. The blank hungered for the memory of his father, not the actual man, but the painful tether that Elias had never forgiven himself for holding on to. The survivors drifted back as the creature from his past surged closer again, fueled by the emotion Elias could no longer hide. The blank tightened around him like a clenched fist. The survivors shuddered, knowing what was coming. And with a trembling, sorrowful whisper, one of them delivered the warning that chilled Elias to the bone. Whatever you do, do not let the blank decide what you become. Elias had barely absorbed the survivors, warning when the blank shifted again, as though the dimension itself had drawn a deeper breath. The airless space thickened, pressing against his thoughts with suffocating weight. Every ripple in the darkness felt sharper, hungrier. The creature born from his past lurked just beyond his reach, growing more defined with each passing moment. Elias sensed it studying him, not with eyes, but with a terrible intimacy, as if it knew the architecture of his guild better than he did. The survivors drifted back, their fragmented forms shuddering with fear, creating a thin, uneven barrier between him and the monster. But they knew the truth. They were not shields. They were warnings. One of them, its voice like cracking paper, leaned close. You want escape, it murmured, its face flickering in and out of existence. All who come here want it. But escape is not a door. It is a surrender. Elias swallowed hard, trying to steady the storm inside him. What kind of surrender? The survivor's form spasmed when it answered. You must give up the thing it feeds on. Your memories, your identity, your sense of self. Its tone deepened with a tremor of dread. To break the blank's hold on you, you must unmake yourself. The words struck him with the force of a falling world. Elias felt the consequence immediately. If he did what they said, if he surrendered his memories, erased the emotional wounds the blank prowled, then he would be choosing oblivion over survival. He would escape, yes, but not as himself. He would become an empty shell, a human stripped of meaning, of history, of everything that made life more than biological motion. He clenched his jaw. There has to be another way, he whispered. A different survivor drifted forward, its body filled with hollow cavities where memories used to live. There was once, it whispered. Long ago, some tried to fight the blank. They tried to hold on to themselves. But the stronger the mind, the more violently the blank tore it apart. Elias shuddered, imagining his thoughts shredded into monstrous fragments. The blank does not allow resistance, another murmured. Identity is its food. Emotion is its scent. Your memories are the rope that ties you to its jaws. To pull free, you must cut that rope. The creature of Elias's past crept closer, its outline sharpening like a blade forged in darkness. It fed off every flicker of his doubt, every whisper of fear swelling inside him. The survivors drifted aside, their broken faces bowed in grim acceptance. They had seen this choice faced by countless others. Some tried to erase everything. Some tried to fight. Some let the blank consume them completely. None had ever left whole. Elias felt his thoughts trembling, teetering at the edge of collapse. But if I let go of my memories, what will be left? His voice cracked, because the answer terrified him more than the creature stalking him. The hollow-eyed survivor spoke with a sorrow that felt centuries old. You will remain alive, but you will not remain you. It hesitated, then added, for some, that is still salvation. For others, a fate worse than what hunts them. Elias's chest tightened. He thought of faces he loved, of the life he had built, of the mistakes he wished he could fix. How could he erase all of that? How could he willingly become nothing, just to avoid being devoured? The blank trembled around him, sensing the battle waging inside his thoughts. The creature flickered again, growing larger, stronger, hungrier. The survivors recoiled as the void pulsed with a violent ripple. The blank was impatient. You must decide, one whispered. Every moment you hesitate strengthens what hunts you. The survivor's voice wavered. But know this, forgetting is not peace. It is exile from yourself. You will escape this place, but you will never escape what you lose. Elias closed his eyes, trying to breathe, though breath was meaningless here. He felt his memories like a fragile constellation inside his mind, a fragile cluster of stars the blank wanted to swallow. He imagined them dimming one by one, snuffed out until only darkness remained. The thought sickened him, but the alternative was worse. A cold truth settled over Elias. If he did nothing, the blank would consume him entirely. If he erased everything, he might escape, but the cost would be unbearable. This was the forbidden path. Escape by self-destruction, freedom through annihilation of the self. The survivors drifted further back, their broken forms trembling with sympathy they no longer fully understood. And in the suffocating stillness, Elias realized something devastating. In the blank, survival was not a battle. It was a sacrifice. Elias drifted in the suffocating silence of the blank, the pressure of the entity behind him pressing against the very edges of his mind. The fragmented survivors hovered near, trembling forms of warning and memory, their hollow eyes reflecting the terror that awaited him. He could feel the creature of his past, the embodiment of his regrets and failures, coiling itself around him like a living shadow, anticipating the moment he would falter. Every thought, every fear, every fleeting flicker of hope fed the monster. The blank thrummed with impatience. Time did not exist here, but Elias felt it stretching, a relentless pulse pressing him toward a single point of decision. He closed his eyes, trying to hold himself together. His mind raced through the countless fragments of memory that the blank had used to torment him. Faces he had loved, words he had left unsaid, moments he had hoped to forget, they all rose now in unbearable clarity. The creature leaned closer, and with it, every unhealed wound pressed sharply into his consciousness. The pressure was not physical, but it might as well have been. It squeezed his thoughts, his emotions, his very sense of identity. If he did nothing, the blank would consume him entirely, unmaking him piece by piece, leaving only the echo of a human form. And yet the survivors' warnings echoed louder than the monster's presence. Cut the rope, they had said. Give up what it feeds on. Escape at the cost of yourself. The words twisted like knives in his mind. To surrender memory, to erase the parts of himself that defined who he was that survival or suicide? But Elias understood something crucial in that moment. The blank did not merely take, it was selective. It responded to the choices of its prey, to the will of those caught in its infinite dark. Hesitation was a luxury he could not afford. His mind grasped at the brightest, most unshakable memory he had, the one fragment of himself he would never abandon. A moment of clarity from his teenage years, sitting alone on a hill watching the sun set. The warmth of the fading sunlight, the gentle rustle of the grass, the stillness that had seemed eternal at the time. He clung to it with everything he had left. For the first time since being dragged into the blank, he realized that he could shape the void, but only if he gave it something he truly owned, something the predators could not twist or steal without consequence. The creature recoiled slightly as he drew the memory forward, embedding it into the very darkness. The blank itself reacted, quivering, reshaping around the concentrated point of emotion and clarity. The entity formed from his guilt shrieked in a way that was not sound, a psychic roar that twisted the emptiness into jagged pulses. But Elias held on. He poured every ounce of focus and willpower into the memory, letting it radiate outward, a beacon of identity resisting the devouring dark. The fragmented survivors hovered nearer now, their broken forms trembling with recognition. They had seen others fail, but here, perhaps, was a mind strong enough to fight back. Elias understood what they had meant. Survival was not merely physical, it was mental, emotional, existential. The blank could consume body, fear, regret, and hope alike. But the one thing it could not entirely devour was the choice to define oneself, however small or fragile. And yet the cost was immediate and terrifying. The longer he maintained the memory, the more other memories surfaced uncontrollably, clawing through his mind, threatening to undo him. The blank pressed harder. Shadows of other regrets and lost moments formed ghostly shapes around him, each one reaching, demanding, trying to break the focus. His chest ached, his head throbbed, his vision, if it could be called vision, blurred with the weight of the assault. He gritted his teeth. I am not nothing. I am not nothing. I am still me. He repeated it over and over, a mantra against dissolution. Slowly, tremblingly, the creature's form began to falter, destabilizing as the strength of the memory held. The blank's hunger pressed from all sides, but he no longer reacted in fear. He met it with clarity. He met it with intention. For the first time, he felt that his mind, fractured and battered though it was, could define a fragment of the void rather than merely being defined by it. The fragmented survivors drifted closer, their voices whispering in unison inside his mind, not mocking but urging. Hold on, make it yours, do not let it twist you. Shape the blank, or it will shape you. Elias clung to the hill, to the sunlight, to the simple peace of that single memory, feeling the weight of himself press back against the void, the predators, the endless dark. And in that moment, for the first time since being dragged into the blank, he understood a vital truth. The creatures that lurked here, the predators of memory, the twisted embodiments of guilt and fear, they existed because humans brought them into being. They were not eternal. They were shapes born from thought, sustained by emotion, and therefore they could be unmade, if only one had the strength to confront them directly. The creature shivered, its form unraveling slightly. The blank shuddered with the effort of resistance. Elias tightened his focus, refusing to let fear or guilt dictate him. He did not know if he would survive this, or if he would leave whole. But he knew this: to yield to the blank was to vanish entirely. To fight, even at the cost of being fractured, altered, forever changed, was to remain. The dark around him pressed one last time, a final effort to overwhelm him. And Elias faced it, unflinching, holding the memory of sunlight and grass like a sword. For the first time, he did not feel entirely alone. Elias felt the blank tremble one last time. The predators born of his memories, the entity shaped from guilt, the fragments of regret and sorrow, flickered and wavered, unsure of their hold. His focus had held long enough, and in the void, that was all that mattered. The memory of the hill, the sunlight, the soft rustle of grass, had anchored him in a way the blank could not undo. He realized then that the predators were not truly independent, they existed only because he allowed them to, because he carried the weight that gave them form. Slowly, imperceptibly at first, their twisted outlines began to disintegrate, unraveling into threads of nothingness, leaving only the pressure of the void. The fragmented survivors drifted closer, some stabilizing, some still flickering, but all offering silent acknowledgement. They had existed in this space for an eternity, caught between being and nothingness, and yet they had survived. Elias understood now that survival here was not about overpowering the blank, nor escaping it. It was about claiming a fragment of self that the void could not touch, a single truth strong enough to withstand the hunger. His memories, sharpened and focused, had become his weapon, and his lifeline. The entity of his past, the one that had haunted him since he first arrived, let out a final roar, silent, yet deafening inside his mind, and collapsed into the void. The blank did not vanish, it was infinite, eternal, and patient. But the immediate threat was gone. Elias drifted in the stillness, aware of every memory, every fragment of himself, and aware that he had survived when many before him had been consumed entirely. He felt his consciousness stretch, unbound by direction or gravity, yet he was not afraid. The survivors around him whispered faintly in echoes, reminders that he was not alone and that the blank, though it hungered and waited, could be confronted with will and memory. And though they were not entirely whole, they existed as testament that human identity, even fractured, even broken, was more resilient than the devouring void. Elias made his choice. He would leave the blank, carry the weight of survival, and step back into the world he had known, forever changed. The hunger of the void had not consumed him. The predators had not claimed him. But their presence lingered, a reminder that the mind, once exposed to the blank, could never entirely forget what waited in the dark. When he emerged, or what he perceived as emergence, the world did not feel the same. Light had sharper edges, air carried weight, the floor held beneath his feet. Everything was familiar, yet alien, as though he had glimpsed the infinite machinery behind reality itself. He knew, with a quiet certainty, that his life would never return to the way it had been. He carried the memory of the void inside him, like a scar in the mind. And somewhere, deep beneath conscious thought, he felt the blank waiting. Patient, eternal, hungry, Elias breathed, not out of fear, but in acknowledgement. He had survived the unthinkable, faced the predators born of himself, and emerged whole enough to remember who he was. The blank could wait, but he had learned its truth. It only existed because humans remembered. And as long as he did, he could carry both the memory and the victory. Yet even as he walked into the familiar world, a whisper threaded through his mind, a soft, insistent pulse, the faintest echo of the void. We wait. And Elias knew it was true. The blank never forgets. He had survived, but survival had a price. And the darkness would wait for the next one.